Have you ever stopped to ask yourself why you're still thinking about someone who clearly stopped thinking about you? That's the question most people avoid because the answer is uncomfortable. You went silent, they went silent, and now you're sitting in this weird emotional vacuum where nothing is resolved, nothing is clear, and somehow you still can't let it go completely. Here's what most people get wrong about mutual no contact with someone who has narcissistic or avoidant patterns. They think the silence is neutral, just space, just distance, just two people moving on. But silence is never neutral. Silence reveals everything. When both sides go quiet, the person with avoidant attachment is often studying the silence, realizing it's not as peaceful as they imagined. When the silence comes from someone with narcissistic traits, it's being used deliberately to punish, control, or communicate displeasure. And in both cases, what happens next depends entirely on one thing: whether you're using this silence to heal or whether you're just waiting for them to break first. Let me tell you what I keep coming back to after years of looking at this dynamic. The silence itself isn't the story. The story is what each person does inside the silence. Because while you're over here wondering if they miss you, if they're thinking about you, if they regret how things ended, they're going through a psychological process that has almost nothing to do with you and everything to do with how their mind was wired to handle closeness and loss. Let's start with the avoidant, the person who pulled away when things got too intimate, the person who needed space to breathe, who felt suffocated by your needs, who made you feel like wanting connection was somehow a character flaw. When you go no contact with a dismissive avoidant, they feel relief and regain their freedom once the breakup happens. That's the part nobody tells you. In those first days, maybe even the first few weeks, they're not missing you. They're exhaling. Their nervous system is finally calm. The core wound of a dismissive avoidant revolves around the fear of losing independence. When you were around, your love triggered that fear constantly. Now that you're gone, the threat is gone. And this is where most people make a fatal mistake. They interpret that silence as confirmation that the avoidant never cared, that you were right to leave, that they're cold, unfeeling, incapable of love. But that's not what's happening. The dismissive avoidant comes off as emotionally unavailable and cold, but they do have feelings, and the people they care about, they care deeply about. The relief they feel isn't because you didn't matter. It's because the pressure to perform emotional availability, to show up in ways their nervous system reads as dangerous, has finally lifted. But here's where it gets interesting. They won't feel the breakup until the 6 to 8 week mark. They start to really grieve the relationship far later down the line than other attachment styles. Most people don't make it that far. Most people break the silence at week 3 because the anxiety becomes unbearable. They send the text. They check the Instagram story. They reach out through a mutual friend. And the moment they do that, they reset the entire cycle. If you step in and do the emotional labor for them by filling the gap and fixing what they broke, you simply teach them that withdrawal has no consequence. You teach them that you will always be the one to bridge the distance. You teach them that their pattern works. Sit with that for a moment. The avoidance internal process during mutual silence follows a predictable arc. First, relief. Then, around week 4 or 5, something shifts. Anxious curiosity takes over, and the avoidant begins looking for signs that they could still get you back if they really wanted to. They might check your social media, ask mutual friends how you're doing, or find small excuses to mention you to others. But they're not ready to reconnect. They want reassurance that you're still emotionally available just in case. This is the whole game right there. They don't want you back yet. They want to know you're still waiting, because as long as you're waiting, they still have control. They still have the option. They can continue processing at their own pace without any risk of actually losing you. But when you don't give them that reassurance, when your silence remains absolute, something in them begins to crack, not loudly, not dramatically. They break quietly, in the only way they know how. A careful message that looks casual on the surface and is loaded underneath. Now, let's talk about the narcissist, because this is where the silence does something completely different. One of the biggest reasons narcissists use the silent treatment is to gain control. When they feel challenged, criticized, or ignored, they may respond by cutting off communication, which puts the other person in a weakened position. But here's what most people don't understand. There's a huge difference between the silent treatment of a narcissist and the silence of no contact. Through no contact, a healing begins to take place, while the other silence does not heal anyone. When a narcissist gives you the silent treatment, it's a weapon. It's designed to make you chase. It's designed to make you question yourself, apologize, beg for their attention, prove your worth. The silent treatment is a form of emotional abuse typically used by people with narcissistic tendencies, designed to place the abuser in a position of control, silence the target's attempts at assertion, avoid conflict resolution, or punish the target for a perceived ego slight. But when you go silent too, when you stop playing the game entirely, you remove their supply. Silence is something that narcissists cannot control. When you stay quiet, they lose their power over you. And that right there is everything. Because a narcissist's silence was never about needing space. It was about controlling your emotional state. It was about keeping you in a state of anxiety, uncertainty, and self-doubt. The silence isn't empty. It's full of unspoken messages meant to hurt, confuse, and dominate. When you match their silence with your own, one of two things happens. When faced with the no contact rule, narcissists may escalate their attempts to get in touch with you. They're used to getting attention and validation, and your sudden silence can trigger an intense reaction. They might love bomb you, they might play the victim, they might try to hoover you back in with sudden warmth, apologies, or promises, or they move on. They find a new source of supply, and honestly, that tells you everything you need to know. Here's what the research actually shows. After a breakup, people with dismissive avoidant attachment styles have been shown to suffer the most and take longer to feel less in love, in part because they don't tend to have the skills to cope with the emotions that eventually surface. And yet, on the surface, they look fine. They look unbothered. They look like they've moved on effortlessly. The narcissist, on the other hand, doesn't suffer the loss of you as a person. They suffer the loss of control. Narcissists don't use the silent treatment by accident. It's often a calculated move, and one of the biggest reasons they do this is to gain control, leaving the other person wondering what happened and how to fix it. When you refuse to chase, you've taken that control away. So, let's talk about what happens to you during this mutual silence, because this is the part that actually changes things. Anxious, preoccupied people tend to struggle most in the early stages. The core wound underneath this style is often, "I will be abandoned." And no contact feels like confirmation of that fear. The urge to reach out can feel overwhelming. But this isn't weakness. It's a nervous system doing exactly what it was conditioned to do. You're going to feel like you're dying at first. You're going to replay every conversation. You're going to question whether you overreacted. You're going to wonder if you're the problem. Your brain is going to tell you that if you just reach out, if you just explain one more time, if you just give them another chance, things will be different. But here's what I've learned. Mutual no contact breaks the cycle of intermittent reinforcement that makes dismissive avoidant breakups so difficult to overcome. When your ex occasionally reaches out with ambiguous messages or brief moments of warmth, it reactivates hope and resets your healing clock. Maintaining strict boundaries prevents these setbacks. Without their influence, you begin to recognize patterns that may have been invisible while in the relationship. And many people report aha moments about relationship dynamics around the 30-day still mark of no contact. This is what most people miss. The silence isn't punishment, it's clarity. Every day you don't reach out is a day your nervous system learns that you can survive without their validation. Every week that passes is another layer of fog lifting. You start to see the relationship not as it felt in the moment, but as it actually was. You start to notice how much energy you were spending managing their emotions, how much of yourself you were editing to keep them comfortable, how often you apologized for things that weren't your fault, how normal it became to feel anxious, uncertain, walking on eggshells. And slowly, the silence stops being something you're enduring and becomes something you're choosing. I want to be really clear about something. This doesn't mean the avoidant was evil. It doesn't mean the narcissist was a monster. What it means is that some people are not capable of the kind of relationship you need, not because you're too much, but because they haven't done the work to show up in healthy ways. For the partner of an avoidant, the point of no return is not loud. It's not yelling, blocking, or sending a long final message. It's quiet. And it's when you stop believing that change is possible. You stop chasing closure. You stop trying to earn peace. You stop confusing breadcrumbs with love. And you understand that love without reciprocity is not love at all. Here's what happens when both of you stay silent long enough. The avoidant might eventually reach out. Dismissive avoidants are the most stubborn of the attachment styles, so everything takes a long time, and everything needs to feel like their idea. When you try to impose your own ideas on them, it pushes them away more, which is why giving an avoidant what they want, the breakup and the space, allows them to come to terms with what they want in the future. But it takes longer, and oftentimes when you start to see those results, you're not really in a place where you want them back anymore. And that's the irony. By the time they're ready, you've moved on. Not because you stopped caring, but because you finally started caring about yourself more. The narcissist, if they come back, will come back with tests, small messages, casual check-ins. They're not coming back because they've changed. They're love bombing, showering you with excessive affection, praise, and attention. Narcissists use this tactic to regain control and manipulate their targets into reciprocating their feelings or forgiving their past actions. And it's important to remember that this sudden overflow of affection is typically not genuine, but rather a calculated move to serve their own needs and agenda. So, what do you do with this information? How do you move forward when both of you have gone silent and you don't know what happens next? You stop trying to control what they do in the silence. You stop checking to see if they've noticed you're gone. You stop performing your healing on social media, hoping they'll see it and realize what they lost. Because none of that is for you. That's still the old pattern. That's still making them the center of your emotional world. What matters is not the silence itself. It's what happens inside you during that silence. You use this time to ask yourself the questions you've been avoiding. Why did I stay so long in something that hurt me? What was I getting from that dynamic? What part of me believed I had to earn love instead of receive it freely? What story am I telling myself about my worth that made this relationship feel like the best I could get? Those questions are hard, they're uncomfortable, but they're the only way out. Because here's the truth. Whether the avoidant comes back or not, whether the narcissist moves on or tries to hoover you back in, none of that determines your value. None of that tells you whether you made the right choice. The only thing that matters is whether you're using this silence to become someone who would never accept that dynamic again. You don't light up when they reach out. You don't panic when they disappear. You simply lose the need to fight for potential. And you begin to protect your peace instead of the relationship. That's the shift. That's what mutual silence reveals. Not whether they miss you, not whether they regret losing you, but whether you're finally ready to stop abandoning yourself for people who are never going to meet you where you are. Most people never get this far in understanding themselves. They break the silence too early. They go back too soon. They convince themselves that this time will be different because the pain of being alone feels worse than the pain of being neglected. But you know what's worse than being alone? Being with someone and still feeling alone. Being in a relationship where you have to shrink yourself to be tolerable. Being loved conditionally, inconsistently, in ways that keep you constantly anxious and off balance. The silence is showing you something. It's showing you that you can survive without them. It's showing you that the world doesn't end when they're not in it. It's showing you that maybe, just maybe, the version of you that exists without them is stronger, clearer, more whole than the version that was constantly trying to earn their approval. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. So, when people ask me what happens when you and the narcissist or avoidant both stop contacting each other, here's what I tell them. What happens next depends entirely on you. Are you using this silence to finally do the work you've been avoiding? Are you building a life that doesn't revolve around someone else's emotional availability? Are you learning to trust yourself again? Or are you just waiting? Waiting for them to come back. Waiting for closure. Waiting for an apology that will never feel like enough. Waiting for proof that you mattered. Because if you're waiting, you're still stuck, and they know it. The avoidant knows you're still available. The narcissist knows you're still hooked, and the cycle will repeat the moment you give them an opening. But if you're healing, if you're genuinely rebuilding, if the silence has become a space where you're rediscovering who you are outside of that dynamic, then it doesn't matter what they do next. It doesn't matter if they reach out or disappear forever. You're already free. That's what mutual silence actually reveals. Not their feelings, not their regrets, not whether you were right or wrong to leave. It reveals whether you're finally ready to choose yourself over the version of love that required you to lose yourself to keep it. And nobody tells you this part. Nobody tells you that the real transformation doesn't happen when they come back. It happens when you realize you don't need them to.